Welcome to School Talk. My name is Jason Palich. I'm the chairperson of our Shrewsbury School Committee, and I am joined tonight by my colleagues, Sandra Fritz, John Wensky, Dale McGee. And we have a very exciting topic tonight, which is, of course, the Beal Early Childhood Center, historic structure right in the center of town that has served Shrewsbury Public Schools well in a variety of capacities for not only many years, but many generations at this point. We are, of course, undertaking a project to construct a new K-4 elementary school that will take the place of the functioning of Beal as it exists now. This is going to be a project that we are going to be talking with the community about quite a bit in the lead up to an anticipated public vote in early November. So I'm going to turn things over now to Sandy. Of course, this project is being guided by the Beal Building Committee, which this committee has a representative on. And Sandy, you've done a lot of work as our representative on that committee. Why don't you give us a little bit of basic background about the project proposal, why it's needed, what's going to be happening?
Okay, just an overview of the project. That building, the Beal building itself, is 95 years old, and like Jason said, it served the community well in various capacities, but it's really at the end of its useful life, and it no longer meets the educational needs of the district. And we're looking at this project as what are the goals for this new building, and it's a long-term space solution for K-4 enrollment, provide full-day kindergarten access for all, provide equitable space across all 5 of the elementary schools for art, music, and other educational programs. At this point, we have hired a project manager, which is PMA, our architect, Salerno Pagano, and these are the 2 groups that we worked with on the recent Sherwood project. We also the districts partner with the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and they support the design and construction of educationally appropriate, flexible, sustainable, and cost-effective school facilities. So we're through it's called the PDP, or the Preliminary Design Development, and we worked with the MSBA to make sure that we were on track. And what were we going to look at? A renovation, an addition, or a new school? And they looked at 2 options: kindergarten and a grade 1 school design for $750, or a kindergarten through grade 4 school design for 790 students. And the MSBA has a series of steps that you go through as a process, and it's really a check and balance at the state level to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the district, but you're also meeting the needs of the taxpayers in the Commonwealth who are providing funds for these school buildings. So at this point, we have really looked at everything, and we've gone through grade configuration, and we looked at stakeholders, getting input from them. We looked at school enrollment projections, estimated transportation costs, and we've also addressed educational pros and cons of each model. And as you know, in October of last year, the school committee voted to go forward with that K-4 model. So that's the model. We're going with K-4, and then the next step is where are we going to put this new building? We did an exhaustive search of 31 sites throughout the town.
And just that included, as I understand it, every single piece of publicly owned land under the control of the town of Shrewsbury, am I right?
Yes. And we had to make sure we looked at everything and where was the best place to put it, and also looking at where would be the best site for a new elementary school. Not as close to maybe one of the other schools, because we're looking at some overcrowding, especially at the Floral. And the south side of town was a little more desirable for some reasons, looking at getting to pull away students from Floral to bring down their enrollment. So we ultimately determined that the best site for the school is that Glavin property, and we're in the process of working with the state to obtain that piece of property, and we should have that by July 31st. On June 27th, we had a good piece of news. The MSBA voted to move the Beal project to the next phase, which is the preferred schematic design. And during that review in Boston, they commented that the educational program description, which is a huge part of the design plan, was actually one of the best that they had reviewed, which was great. I think there's a lot of credit to Dr. Sawyer, Amy Clowder, our assistant superintendent, and the Beal principal, Chris Girardi, who worked very hard in getting that together. So where do we sit currently? The architects will now move into that schematic design phase of the project, and this includes, a schematic design of sufficient detail to establish the scope of the project, the budget, and the schedule for the proposed project going forward. There is a timeline for the district to submit the schematic design to the MSBA, and we're hoping to have that by mid-September. The MSBA will vote on the project scope and the budget agreement by October 31st at the latest. And once they vote, we have 120 days, the town has 120 days to approve the project. And if it is approved by town vote, we move to the design completion, we bid the project, and we go into construction. And we have an estimated construction completion of August of 2022.
So from a timeline perspective for members of the public, one of the things that, we always hear, when is this going to come to voters in the community? When is this going to come before town meeting? Obviously, both of those decisions are within the purview of the Board of Selectmen, but based on public discussions that they've already had, we are anticipating a town meeting vote to authorize the borrowing sometime towards the end of October. We are at this point anticipating that a debt exclusion vote would come before voters concurrently with our state elections on November 6th. So from the public's perspective, this project is going to come up relatively quickly. From a financial perspective, obviously this is an investment. Any building or capital project has a large price tag associated with it. It becomes a value proposition for the community. Dale, what do you think about this project from a financial or an investment perspective?
Well, there's a lot of structure to this. What we heard from Sandy just now is that there, besides a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of structure. The state is involved to a tremendous degree, and they're picking up a very large piece of this. About half of the cost is coming from the state, which is good. It puts less of a strain on the local budget, so that's a good thing. But the other part is that they've involved themselves, they've immersed themselves into the detail of this project. And although when someone says that they're from the government and they're here to help, you often feel that you're going to hold your breath and you're a little worried about needless bureaucracy. Everything I've seen and everything that I have heard from others is that this is a welcome involvement, that it is a very well organized organization.
The MSBA.
The Massachusetts School Building Authority, and that the structure they bring to the project gives us some comfort. It allows us to feel good that the size of the school is appropriate for this community now and in the future. It allows us to have some comfort that the consultants we've chosen and the architects we've chosen are providing work that is at least comparable to the other districts in the state. They give us guidelines with regard to how much we should expect to pay for this. And so we're not going to go way off the rails on any of these things. And I think that that's a good thing. So from an investment point of view, if it's well designed, it's located where the students are, it's well thought out, it's comparable to what other districts are doing, and it meets our needs today and into the near future at least, then I think this is an excellent investment for us, and I think it's one that the community will value.
And certainly from a monetary perspective, and Sandy, maybe you can expand on this a little bit. So obviously one of the things that we are required to examine as part of the MSBA process is the current building. Do we necessarily need to build a new structure or acquire new space? Could we renovate, rehabilitate, expand the current structure? And I think of the Beal building as it is now, and it was constructed in the immediate aftermath of World War I.
Right.
It served this community well for a century. We certainly explored thoroughly that option. Sandy, what were some of the walls we ran into with that, the potential option to actually keep the program at the current site? What were some of the barriers to that?
Yeah, that is a very small building. We know it's an older building. The piece of property that it sits on is small. There's some ball fields in the back. I think it's a baseball field in the back. So looking at future projections for an elementary school as we move forward, that particular piece of property is just not big enough for the size of the school that the MSBA is determining. It's just traffic flow. It's just not a site that's doable, and that's why we had to look at where are other options within the community that would fit a building that size to house the students, a 790 student parking, fields, all of that into one space. And there were, again, 31 spots, but there was nothing really that big. I think we came down to a handful that would actually house that size.
And just as we talk about this as an investment from a financial piece, obviously we want to make sure we're considering the long-term needs of our district and the students. John, give us your thoughts a little bit on how does this project fit in to the long-term needs Shrewsbury Public Schools is going to have when it comes to meeting the space needs of our kids in our program?
Certainly, I mean, we certainly have broader space needs as a district, and our population, student population isn't getting any smaller. We've seen sustained growth over a 15-year period. And really, as we talk about the Beal project, it's not just about the building itself, but how it impacts the other elementary schools in town. Also looking ahead too to the next 5 years and our strategic priorities, one of the key priorities that we have is space and resources to support effective learning. And really this plays right into it. We know the elementary level has had space constraints for years. The last elementary school to open was Floral back in 1997, and that opened at overcapacity, right? And today you look at Beal being used not only for some kindergarten classes, but also 3, I think, overflow classes from the Floral school, right? So when you look at a brand new elementary school in town, it does have a positive ripple effect on all elementary schools in town to kind of free up the space that's needed for other educational needs within these classrooms, opening up maybe more space. I know in some schools they have a kind of the art class on a cart versus art classrooms, which impacts how you drive curriculum in those types of classes. So I think it's also important to note too that you're looking at having kindergarten through 4th grade in every one of the elementary schools, not just having maybe a destination for some kindergartens in Beal. So you'd have 5 consecutive grades in one building, which I think is important for continuity and stability amongst teachers, parents, and students to get to know that community. The other key impact to this whole thing is full day kindergarten tuition free. We've always talked about the fees involved with kindergarten in Shrewsbury, and that's due to the space constraints that we have today. So opening up a new elementary school will also impact that.
And I just want you raised, I think, the point. It's not the building. I mean, we can build really nice buildings, but it's what is the educational program that happens within the building. And that is another reason why we need space. We have needs for special education curriculum, we have needs for English language learners, and we have places that years ago you didn't need this extra space, but the state requires that you have X amount of footage for certain programs.
And as Dale had alluded to earlier, and maybe you could expand on this, Sandy, the MSBA involves itself in this process of developing an educational program. They're not simply interested in throwing money in any school building.
Right.
They have certain standards and expectations of the space that we're going to provide. Is that correct?
Right. And part of the submission to the MSBA was a very detailed, I think it's 50-page report that went, again, Amy Clouder was instrumental in getting that. And they list, why do we need this school? And there's actually, in the statement of interest that we submit, we have to demonstrate why the educational needs of the community require a school of this size with rooms of this size. And she talked about, there's insufficient space to offer all students full-day K in the current building. Cafeteria space is undersized for the enrollment, requiring the use of small rooms off the cafeteria to seat students. There's not enough room, again, for special education and student support services. We don't have room for art, music. There's also a lack of space for educators to collaborate either together or with parents. So there's lots of different things. So, they go through, this is why it doesn't work, and then they get into the key components of the educational program within the new school. And they talk about a new grade configuration of kindergarten to grade 4, the creation of inclusive mixed grade level communities and a neighborhood layout, inclusion of specialist staff in half classroom spaces within groupings, attention to preserving, which I think is very important because Beal's kind of a special place in our community, to preserving the early childhood feel of the kindergarten by clustering classrooms at the level together and in proximity to the outdoors. And they just kind of go through neighborhood feel. Siblings are going to be in a certain age go together instead of having lots of transitions. So the educational program is extremely detailed, and then it goes into each, math, English. They go into every, component and why this is the needs for the new school.
Coming back to the investment perspective, because obviously capital projects of this size aren't the kind of thing that a town engages in on a regular basis. I know that there's going to be a lot of temptation to compare the cost of this project to Sherwood or the library or even the high school of, we're now looking at 15 years in the new high
Right.
school. Why do we think that that might be a little bit out of the ballpark there?
Well, I mean, costs go up, so let's just start with that. That's very easy. And I think the standards change as well as to what the structure needs to be. So we need to look at both of those things. A much more valid approach would be to look at what other schools similar to this are costing in other districts around this time. And if we go to other districts and see, we're very comparable to them. We are not out of the ballpark at all. And there are other districts that are going beyond the minimum that the Mass School Building Association requires, and going beyond that. So what they're recommending is kind of a bare bones sort of approach.
Right, and I think, what we're looking at, and we really shouldn't compare Sherwood and Beal because they're different schools, and, different age groups. And Sherwood was built during the recession, construction costs were low, material costs were low, and now we're at the point where we're having a significant rise in building materials and so forth. And the MSBA's reimbursement rate is actually, it's gone up, but it's been a little flat, and the cost of construction is higher. So that's, you're gonna see a higher price tag. And if you were to, we've looked at this, if you were to look at recent projects and work them out into today's dollars, is a significant change in. You want to go through the numbers? I mean, they're pretty.
Actually, let's do that in a
Yeah.
minute, but one of the things that strikes me too, because the question of the alternative inevitably comes up. What if we simply stayed where we are now, put some money into repairing the structure, and it comes back to the deficiencies of the current space, where we have a situation where we have two paths before us,
Yeah.
one of which has a big price tag associated with it, but it is going to be something that addresses the space needs of the community in the long term. It's something that the MSBA, the state, is going to participate in paying for, whereas we know if we stayed with the current site as it is now, the MSBA has determined that that site is not adequate to meet
Right.
our needs. Their likelihood of participating is minimal, and we're going to find ourselves as a community investing in a property that we don't think is going to be serving us
Right.
in the long term. So it's
Right.
good money after bad.
Right. And I think, Bob Cox, I mean, he's been through a lot of projects in this community and was instrumental in, from day one meeting with the MSBA and talking about the deficiencies in that building and the costs to, replace some of the major things. And it's still, because of the structure of that building, we'd be spending a lot of money. We wouldn't be, the biggest thing, we would not be working on space needs.
Right.
And that's the biggest thing, this community, we're seeing projections going up, but it's only getting worse.
And I think that's one of the key differences, right, between what we're talking about with the Beal project and Sherwood, the space constraints across the entire elementary level.
Right.
Completely different. You're talking about a building capacity that's close to 3 times the size of what we're looking at Beal today. So.
Right.
And John, you had brought up earlier the issue of tuition-free full-day kindergarten, and that's something that as a committee, we've made a policy choice on in developing our 5-year strategic goals for this district. We as a committee have decided that we want Shrewsbury Public Schools to move towards full-day kindergarten that's tuition-free. And you go back 10 or 15 years, in the way that Shrewsbury approaches kindergarten would in the past have very much been the norm. A limited number of full-day spaces, it's done by lottery, and then there's a fee structure. We, in the last decade, have moved way out of the norm. It's 96% of students in the Commonwealth now have access to full-day kindergarten. And for us, that question, and we hear from parents all the time, why is there this lottery? Why do I have to pay?
Right.
And for us, it is not, in point of fact, a question of policy or money. It's not a lack of desire. It's not so much a financial issue as right now, if we wanted full-day kindergarten slots for everybody, we couldn't. We don't have the space. It is a literal issue of space.
Right.
And this is an example of how this project is going to meet. It's not just going to be another building, it's actually going to have a tangible impact on the quality and breadth of the educational program we're
Absolutely.
able to offer.
Absolutely. Yeah, and circling back, one thing when we're talking about the cost of the building, you can look at how is it built, and it's called construction manager at risk, CMA at risk, or design bid build. And the building committee voted about a month or so ago. We're going to go with this construction manager at risk and versus the design bid build. Design bid build is where the project's put out to bid, and the lowest bidder is selected. With the construction manager at risk, this project delivery system allows the town to select the construction manager based on qualifications, experience, and the proposed team, rather than the lowest cost. And you also have a set, this is the set amount that the building's going to cost. Any overages over that are at the construction manager's cost, because this is what they said we can provide your project at. So I think it's we kind of have a set amount we know we're going to spend versus something that might have overages that we would have been accountable for.
Much better for planning.
Yes.
And one question that does, of course, come up quite a bit, and maybe as a school committee it's important for us to address, is what's going to happen to the old building. Obviously, its location right on Maple Avenue, its historical association with our community, its association with so many individual families, whether from several generations ago you went to high school there, or generations closer to mine, you actually went to kindergarten or grade 1 there. What's going to happen to the building? Now, we as a school committee will formally act on that at some point in the future, but we do anticipate that is going to be turned over to a Beal Building Committee to make a determination in the long term about what should become of that property, what should become of that parcel. So there's a lot of questions here about what's in the best interest of our community in the long term. And I think it's important to note that we've been very thoughtful, not only as a school committee, but as an entire town. Sandy, why don't you walk us through a little bit, who are you serving with on the building committee? What other perspectives are being brought to the table on this project?
Well, we have Jim Kane as chair of the building committee, and he's on the BOS. We have Bob Cox with the town department, Joe Sawyer, our superintendent, Pat Collins for the finance piece, Erin Boucher, she is a community at large member, John Mazziello, former finance committee, but he's in the construction field. I'm thinking as we go around the room, and Kevin Mizikar, town manager. So we have a lot of perspectives in there.
And of course, the architects we're working with, we have some experience with as well.
Yeah, Lamro Pagano is a well-known entity for us as a town. We've worked with them on several projects, as well as Paul Queenie and PMA. I mean, these are people that they know us, we know them. And the MSBA knows them, which is great because they're highly respected at the state level, which is great for us, and it's very interesting. I mean, some of the discussions, things I've never knew about we're talking about architectural pieces, and we're going to get more into that deep dive as we go through the MSBA process and hopefully get that vote so we can move into that design plan. But it's a good group, and it's a public meeting. People can come and listen to it at any time.
Yeah. Space needs, because it's been another consistent theme throughout this discussion and throughout our exploration of Beal as a project. We hear a lot about, as a school committee, about the impact that space and space needs can have on the classroom experience. And Dale and John, what are some of your thoughts on what relationship this has to the classroom? Because from the outside looking in, it's easy to see this is a building, bricks and mortar, but obviously our number one concern is the experience that kids are getting. What are some of your thoughts on how a project of this nature might impact the educational experience that kids might be able to receive?
Well, I think you look at the classrooms maybe that have been used for other purposes that were once music classes or art classes that are now being used for maybe kindergarten classes or other grades to fulfill those needs. So I think to put in a new elementary school allows us to open those spaces back up in other schools, and also just kind of levels the student population across all elementary grades. So there's kind of an even number of kids within the district.
So this is an important point. We're not only planning on the space in the building we're building, but we're also working with the space in all the other buildings.
Right.
And relieving the overcrowding that is existing already, so that there's going to be benefits in every school or every elementary school in this district as a result of this. So that's an important point here. The other point, of course, is just that this will enable a certain class size. It will enable a certain approach in making the decision regarding basically an early childhood center versus K through 4. Note that there are more students going to be in this building than there would have been if it was just kindergarten. That being because kindergarten classes are generally smaller than third grade or fourth grade. So in dealing with the space needs there, we have made a choice that will accommodate the most students possible, relieve the overcrowding that is existing in the other schools, and accommodate the growth that we anticipate in the future.
And what I really like about it, it's like a neighborhood school. We're able to keep all the kids who are Floral at Floral.
Exactly.
So they're not having additional transitions.
Right.
They're able to go with their siblings and neighbors, so where every school will be really that neighborhood level, which is great.
Yeah, it's the continuity and community within that one school. I know, I think, and I know that played into how we came up with the, whether it's K through 1 or K through 4, to have them in a single school for 5 consecutive grades. It does contribute a lot to a student's education. Also, the parents know the faculty and staff at that school, and it just continues from kindergarten through 4th grade.
Yeah, and back last summer, I think we met in July with the MSBA, and we actually met at Beal, and one of the concerns they did talk about was the number of transitions that students potentially have in the Shrewsbury system, and this is going to really help alleviate that
Right.
kind of stress.
In the modeling that went into the planning even took into consideration the average amount of time that a student spends on a bus.
Right.
And so in this design choice, the kids are going to get from home to school faster.
And actually geography, I think, of even the site selection process, and obviously the availability of the space, the pricing, the educational program, those are the paramount concerns. But obviously something that we talked about as a school committee, something that the building committee talked about was where geographically the site would be located. The site that we're pursuing, the former Glavin property, is of course south of Route 9. A lot of people don't realize right now that Coolidge Elementary School, which is of course close to the lake, is the only Shrewsbury Public Schools facility located south of Route 9, which when you go back to the population explosion in this community going all the way back to the early 1990s, a huge chunk of that growth has taken place south of Route 9. That's where I grew up, Sandy. That's your neighborhood now. And Floral has absorbed very much the brunt of that. And so the location of this school is going to make a difference as well, because not only are we going to have a neighborhood school, but we're going to have neighborhood schools where kids geographically closer to Floral, geographically closer to this school, will presumably have shorter transportation routes. And obviously, redistricting as a process is not something that's going to take place until we are right up in the year where that's going to open. So specific household decisions are a few years off. We don't want anybody to panic about that. But the end result of this project is going to be that families are going to be geographically situated closer to their K through 4 situation.
Right.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. I know that this is something that the community is going to be hearing quite a bit about in the lead up to early November. And certainly we encourage anybody with questions, concerns, anything to express to contact the school committee. But Sandy, how might folks be able to get in touch with the building committee, either if they had opinions to express or information they wanted to seek?
Yeah, we have an email. It's the Beal campaign are you looking for, or the building committee?
Either the campaign or the building committee.
Yeah, the Beal Building Committee. If you go onto the town website, we have a drop down. You can go right in and look at the material as well as email the building committee. But we also have a campaign committee, and it's the bealcampaign@gmail.com.
And that is, of course, the ballot question committee focused on the debt exclusion for November 6th.
A lot of information there for anybody to look at, and it kind of gets a little deep dive into the why, the how, where, all that information.
Excellent. So this is a topic we'll be focused on quite a bit. We appreciate everyone for taking the time to watch and to learn about this project. And again, please feel free to contact either the school committee or the Beal Building Committee for further information. Thank you to my colleagues Sandra Fritz, Dale McGee, John Wensky. This has been School Talk.